paved the way, history that has now led us to the Messiah. We covered the Sadducees and the Pharisees in part 5. We're going to just mention a few things about them in this, but we want to talk today about who are the Jewish groups or sects in the time of Jesus. When we read about a group, who are they? What are they? And during these sects, during this time, right now, in the time of Christ, it can be traced, people can be traced being influenced by the Greek culture. And we've talked a lot about that, but it has serious ramifications. Many Jews in Palestine and through the Greek world adopted Greek names, and they subscribed to a Greek philosophy, and they looked upon the Greek culture as being more progressive than their old culture in Judaism. The Jews in Palestine were more conservative, though, than the ones in Alexandria, which we've done some videos on that in the past. And other Greek centers held the same views as Alexandria. Some, though, were very opposed to any kind of Greek influence, and they saw it as idolatry, and they sought to live according to the Torah. We mentioned this group earlier, and they are called the Hasidim, and they were the party of the pious people. So you can see there's a lot of room for a lot of different groups, and it's going to be hard to get an agreement amongst all these people to even move forward. The Sadducees were receptive to this Hellenistic culture. The Pharisees and Essenes, now there we'll talk more about the Essenes, were opposed to this Greek culture. This brought these groups into sharp disagreement, and the domain of the Pharisees was the synagogue, and the Sadducees gained control of the temple. And during those Hasmonean rule, they grabbed hold of that temple, and they owned the temple, and obviously the priesthood. The Pharisees developed a system of oral traditions, and they equated the sayings of the rabbis as authoritative as the Bible. And just before Jesus was born, there existed two schools, and these schools were the Hillel, and he was a moderate rabbi who accepted the Roman rule as being compatible. We can live with it. But he was an Orthodox Jew, but he wanted to stay within the framework of the Roman government. Now Shammai, on the other hand, was more strict. He opposed the Romans, and ultimately he had found expression in the Zealots. And the Zealots, you recall that Jesus even had followers, his disciples that were some Zealots. Their resistance brought, though, the destruction of the Jerusalem in 70 A.D. This mentality just wasn't received well by Rome. Men like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, Gamaliel, and Saul of Tarsus were seen, though, as noble Pharisees. It does not seem that any of the Sadducees were considered to be noble, of a noble character. They shared only a distaste for Jesus, both the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now the Essenes, we mentioned those alongside of the Pharisees, were more extreme in their piety. They were extreme, and that's an understatement. They did not tolerate even the temple worship that was being conducted in Jerusalem and the life that they found in Jerusalem. They withdrew to monasteries and in communities, and the one at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, that was them. They're the ones that did that. And they were an offshoot of the Pharisees, but they were much more conservative. There's no historical record, though, of when they were formed. They just seem to have appeared. They did develop doctrines, though, that were unique to them. They believed in immortality, but they did not believe in a bodily resurrection. Now, that's quite the opposite of a Pharisees. They are similar to what we later be called the Docetists, who claimed that Jesus did not even resurrect bodily. Strangely, the Essenes are not mentioned in the New Testament, nor in the Jewish Talmud. Some have tried to link Jesus to this group, but their doctrines just were so different than what he was preaching. Now, the next group, the Herodians, they were a political group, but they were not a religious group, but they had impact, and they are mentioned in the Bible. The Herodians were a group of Jews who supported the dynasty of Herod, obviously. And this was seen as a way to come to terms with the Roman government, to live within the Roman government rules and still be authorized to worship as they wanted. The Herodians did not support breaking off and trying to reestablish the Davidic kingdom. But the Pharisees, that was their goal. They derived their name from Herod himself, and he was known for his lavish building projects in the temple and the fortress at Masada, and they aligned themselves with the Sadducees, the Herodians did, and they wanted cooperation with Rome. The Herodians believed that Herod and his successors were the best option for the Jewish people under Roman rule, and they thought it fulfilled some messianic prophecies. They also accepted the Hellenistic culture and the religion, such as Greek philosophy and astrology, and they were influential among some of the segments of the society. The wealthy people, that's where you would find them. And they had some contacts with Jewish groups, and they are mentioned in Mark 3:6 and 12:13. The Pharisees, they opposed Jesus, and so did the Herodians, and they were trying to work together to have Jesus put down. And they were known for their pragmatism and their loyalty, but they also criticized for their corruption. And they were criticized by John the Baptist and even Jesus himself. They were also disliked by the common people because the people disliked Herod. But the Pharisees hoped to restore David's kingdom, and it's going to be hard for anybody who has that goal to align themselves with the Herodians. Next, we're going to talk about the Nazarenes, and the Nazarenes apparently at the time of Jesus was just simply a name for a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. And it was said that even James, the brother of Jesus, was a leader of the Nazarenes. Well, that's because he was a leader of the church. And the Nazarenes apparently, though, did break off into a separate group, or the group that was known as the Nazarenes, later on. And they want to maintain the law absolutely, and they thought that James the Just, the brother of Jesus, was their ultimate leader at the very beginning. But they separated themselves from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they considered them to be blind guides and hypocrites. So they are isolated, and that it's hard to tell exactly when this group became the general group, the followers of Jesus, into this isolated group. It was said that the Nazarenes believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and that he died on the cross for the sins of the world, and that he rose on the third day. All of this is your basic early Christianity doctrine. The Nazarenes were known for their faith and their love, and they were criticized for their heresy, according to some of their contemporaries, like Caiaphas the high priest. He thought they were heretics, and Saul of Tarsus, he believed that they were heretics, and that's why he was persecuting them. They were also persecuted by Jewish and Roman authorities who saw them as a threat to their power. Finally, the last group we're going to talk about is the Zadokites. The Zadokites. They were discovered in 1896 when a fragment was discovered. The group, it was not known that they existed that long. Let's explain for a little bit. In Ezekiel singled out a particular family, the family of Zadok, as being the only authorized priests for that time. And Now remember, the Levites you had to be a Levite to be a priest in the early Judaism, and now Ezekiel pointed out the Zadoks as being the family that should be the priests. So that's in the book of Ezekiel, and they seemed to have been related to the Sadducees. It's difficult. There's not much information here. This was a fairly recent discovery about them. And they may have broken off from the Sadducees because of their wordiness, or whatever that means. Their writings have been found at Qumran, and it seems to have been a part of a group that migrated to Damascus. But some claim that it ceased to exist in 70 AD, but that can't be true if in 1896 they found proof that they were at Qumran. But anyway, the conclusion of all this is this: the first century was diverse, dynamic, and Judaism found itself in a quandary. They could not get a quorum of people to move in the same direction. Sects emerged and competed for followers and influence and in the Jewish society, and each one had its own beliefs and their practices and expectations. And some of these groups were more popular and more powerful, but some was able to dominate or eliminate others completely. Instead, though, it worked out. These groups coexisted and they interacted with one another, and sometimes peacefully and sometimes violently, but sometimes cooperatively and antagonistically. Their interactions shaped and challenged their identities and their destinies, as well as those of Judaism itself. So, in the time of Jesus, it was very disjointed. God's blessing.